We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other things, not because they are easy, but because they are hard.
Well, since the government, our corrupt government, essentially controls the media, it's no problem for them to produce propaganda film.
For decades, conspiracy theorists have dissected every frame of NASA footage from the historic Apollo moon landings, uncovering evidence they claim proves it was all an elaborate hoax. The inconsistencies have fueled wild speculation about a massive cover-up. Now, a confession from Neil Armstrong himself, shortly before his passing, has ignited a firestorm of doubt. Could the most iconic achievement of the 20th century be a multi-billion-dollar lie? What could Neil Armstrong have said about the moon's landing in his final moments? Join us as we investigate the terrifying secret Neil Armstrong revealed right before his passing.
To demonstrate the ability to go to the moon, to land there, and to return to Earth.
Let me take you back to 1994. Neil Armstrong, the first man to walk on the moon, made a rare public appearance in front of a group of students touring the White House. As the American hero addressed the young crowd, there was an unmistakable tremble in his voice. Tears welled up in his eyes as he struggled to get the words out. He started like this: "Today we have a group of students among America's best. To you we say, we have only completed the beginning. We leave you much that is undone. There are great ideas undiscovered and breakthroughs available to those who can remove one of truth's protective layers."
Today we have with us a group of students among America's best. To you we say, we have only completed a beginning. We leave you much that is undone. There are great ideas undiscovered, breakthroughs available to those who can remove one of truth's protective layers.
Wait, what? Did the moonwalker just hint that secrets are being covered up? That layers of truth need to be peeled back? The audience shifted uncomfortably in their seats as Armstrong's words hung heavy in the air. For years, those cryptic lines confused researchers and all conspiracy nuts. What did the American icon mean by truth's protective layers? Was he trying to tell us something monumental on his deathbed about the greatest achievement of the 20th century? When Joe Rogan caught wind of Armstrong's bizarre speech, his eyes lit up like a kid on Christmas morning.
Well, it seemed if you were conspiracy theory, this would give you a rock-hard boner.
If anyone was going to crack this puzzle, it was the straight-talking podcast king. On one of his mega-popular episodes, Rogan went line by line, analyzing every syllable that left Armstrong's lips that fateful day. He rebuffed the mainstream media's attempt to brush it off as the ramblings of an old man. In classic Rogan style, he didn't mince words. He goes, "This wasn't some insane granddad having a senior moment, guys. Neil was as sharp as a tack, even at that age. This is a dude with a set of Spartan iron balls and nerves of steel. He calmly landed a bucket of bolts on the freaking moon when networks across the globe broadcasted every breath he took. Rogan came out swinging, convinced Armstrong's speech was a last-minute confession about one of the most unbelievable conspiracies of all time, that the moon landings were completely faked as an elaborate hoax. Armstrong isn't just going to randomly bring up this truth's protective layers of garbage for no reason. He knew the jig was up after decades of lying to the public. The dude's conscience finally caught up with him. What drove a peaceful Midwestern engineer like Neil to blow the lid off one of America's proudest moments? Maybe it was the burden of perpetrating a multi-billion-dollar swindle for decades. The guilt of pulling off the greatest magic trick in history and selling it to a global audience finally became too much. Or perhaps Armstrong realized that cold, hard evidence had appeared that poked holes in the official moon landing story. Stuff even NASA couldn't cover up or explain away any longer. Like that strange video of the astronauts struggling to sound excited after their moonwalk.
Hippity hoppity, hippity hoppity, hippity hopping over hill and dale.
Rogan gobbled up that footage, sensing something was very off. Have you seen the press conference with the Apollo crew after they got back to Earth? Those dudes look like they just got busted stealing the office petty cash, nervous and squirming like they know the gig is up.
The press conference from 1969 when they returned from the moon is one of the most cryptic, weird things you'll ever see. These guys look like they just stole something and they're being questioned.
Of course, NASA scrambled to downplay Armstrong's speech, saying the aging astronaut didn't intend to spark wild speculation. But Joe Rogan wasn't buying the excuses anymore. NASA and the government can blow as much smoke up our asses as they want. The rabbit's been spotting running for cover for too long. The conspiracy is cracking right before our eyes. For Rogan and his League of Truth Seekers, Neil Armstrong's final teary-eyed public speech was a rallying cry, a coded plea to challenge the lies and dig up the facts that have been protectively layered for decades. Armstrong's bombshell solidified what they had suspected for years, that America's crowning moment was really just an insanely complex, multi-billion-dollar magic trick to pull one over on the Russians and the entire world during the Cold War's heated space race. Was Neil Armstrong attempting to reveal a Grand Canyon-sized falsehood before he passed away? An unstoppable truth that would dismantle one of America's most heroic narratives? That's up to you to decide. One thing's for certain. In the eyes of conspiracy embracers everywhere, the first man on the moon just obliterated the final protective layer around humanity's greatest achievement. Moving on, let's dive into some of the most mind-bending evidence that has conspiracy theorists convinced that Neil Armstrong's confession was right and the moon landing was an elaborate hoax pulled off by NASA and the US government. One of the biggest duh moments for truthers is the strange case of the waving American flag and the famous photos and videos from the lunar surface. Seriously, just take a look at that footage again. The planted flag appears to be flapping and rippling as if caught in a gentle breeze. Here's the problem. There is no atmosphere on the moon, let alone wind, to make a flag wave like that. It's a total vacuum up there, an airless void of nothingness. Yet the stars and stripes look like they're billowing on a sunny earthly day. Rogan spells it out bluntly. That flapping flag is a 100% confirmed fake, dude. They had to use some kind of wire rigging or trick wave machine to get it to move like that. It completely defies the total vacuum of the lunar environment. It's an open and shut case of staged props mimicking the imagery we all expected from the moon landing, right? NASA itself has copped to rigging the flag for photogenic footage by using a telescoping horizontal rod to get it to flutter on camera. There's more evidence that's got the conspiracy crowd foaming at the mouth, like the total absence of stars and all those gorgeous Brazilian beach-level photos and videos from the lunar surface. Let's think about this for a second. The moon has no atmosphere to diffract light and create that twinkling, starry sky we see on Earth's nights. Out in the large void of space, the stars should have been blazing with brilliant clarity in the pitch-black lunar sky, right? Well, not a single bright speck in the sky can be seen in any of the thousands of photographs and hours of footage from the six-man missions. There is just an inky blank canvas surrounding the heroes and their trusty lunar landers. Online conspiracy vloggers like ODD Reality have capitalized on this head-scratcher. Their jaw-dropping moon landing breakdown raked in over 4 million views by nitpicking every single missing detail. Why no stars at all, NASA? Not even Polaris or the other super bright ones in our night sky. And don't feed us that bull about camera exposures being set for harsh sunlight or whatever. We can clearly see brilliant sun rays and detail in the rocks. Those vloggers even add some spooky music and editing tricks to give you chills as they punch holes in the missing starry sky. It gets your heart racing for sure, wondering if we were all duped. Even casual skeptics and armchair investigators have jumped on this bandwagon, like examining the physics around the lunar lander's rocket blast during descent and takeoff. The thrust from those engines was insane, with multiple tons of force to ease a 17-ton lander against the moon's low gravity. You'd expect that amount of propulsion blasting into the thin, powdery lunar dust would have created a croaking trench at the landing site, right? Instead, the footage shows a pristine, undisturbed surface without the slightest crater beneath the lander's engines. No billowing dust clouds or debris being displaced from the rocket blast whatsoever. Seems highly suspicious. Conspiracy websites are quick to claim that this is ironclad proof the lander never fired its engines and was simply placed on a Hollywood set to fake the descent and launch. You'd see tons of pulverized dust and craters if it was real. Looks like those dusty plots in the desert somewhere would make a perfect shooting location to manufacture all the phony footprint and lander footage, especially since those boot prints left behind by the astronauts seem way too distinct and crisp to have been made in the weak lunar gravity.
That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
Skeptics love pointing out how implausible it was for humans weighing 1/6 their Earth weight to mash such unmistakably deep, well-defined footprints into the moon's soil. The prints are too perfect, like pressing your boot into damp sand at the beach. Add in the astronauts' bizarrely calm demeanor, in that surreal press conference after returning from their historic journey, and you've got a Molotov cocktail of reasonable doubts being lobbed at NASA. In Rogan's words, those dudes looked like a trio of frat boys coming back from robbing the local Quick E-Mart, not legends who just walked among the freaking stars.
The press conference from 1969 when they returned from the moon is one of the most cryptic, weird things you'll ever see.
So was the whole moon landing an insanely complex, top-secret production designed to pull the greatest trick in history on over 600 million enthralled television viewers worldwide back in 1969? A massive hoax to help America flex its technological superiority over those commie Ruskies amid the pressure cooker of the space race. If you're a moon landing denier or diehard conspiracy theorist, all this circumstantial evidence is simply too compelling to ignore. NASA's got millions of whats, hows, and whys to answer before they'll be believed. Let's take a deeper look at some of the nitty-gritty details that conspiracy researchers have been meticulously scrutinizing for years to expose what they claim are indisputable signs the moon landings were completely staged. We've already covered the waving flag and lack of stars in those iconic videos beamed back to Earth. But there are plenty more smoking guns these truth seekers are trying to ram through NASA's doorstep. Have you taken a close look at the moon rock samples the astronauts hauled back from their pioneering expeditions? Geologists and material scientists sure have, and more than a few remain stunned by the properties of these otherworldly souvenirs. For example, why do so many of the rocks appear to be scattered with tiny droplets of pure iron that had somehow been melted into perfect spheres during their formation? Iron melts at around 2,800 degrees Fahrenheit, way hotter than the maximum 280 degrees Fahrenheit sunny day temps on the moon's surface. Conspiracy circles claim these immaculately forged iron particles could have only been produced under the extreme heat of powerful industrial smelters here on Earth. And those smelters just so happen to have been owned by the very companies contracted to manufacture props and mock-ups for manned missions, like Rocketdyne. Truthers insist the only plausible explanation is that these special effects studios were tasked with baking actual moon rocks to create the most realistic props for their billion-dollar soundstage on the moon, the perfect Tinseltown fairy dust to sell their grand delusion. Then there's the baffling case of those blasted cosmic ray particle tracks you'd expect to be roasted through everything repeatedly exposed to deep space radiation on the lunar surface. Only those telltale particle trails seem to be totally absent from all the rocks, tools, and equipment brought back by the astronauts. It's as if those artifacts were sheltered in a total electromagnetic void the entire time, completely shielded from the onslaught of subatomic shrapnel that should have hit the moon because of its lack of a protective Van Allen belt like the one surrounding Earth. Leading skeptics like chemist and inventor Robert Sarbacher are adamant. None of those items from the moon carry even a single particle track of cosmic radiation because they were simply whisked off a soundstage here on Earth, not bathed in lethal space rays for days on the lunar surface. Some scientists find it puzzling that the footprints left by moonwalkers are still in such good condition over 50 years later. Despite the lack of wind or dust storms on the moon, which would usually cause some wear and tear, the prints remain clear with distinct details like heel outlines and toe imprints. These footprints, engraved into the dusty moon surface, appear untouched since the early 1970s, almost as if they were carefully placed there. This anomaly raises questions even among those who support NASA, making them wonder if something more than distance protected the footprints from the effects of space. It's not definite evidence, but it adds to suspicions that perhaps the Apollo missions weren't entirely as isolated from natural wear and tear as believed. NASA has faced challenges in replicating the iconic moonwalks of the Apollo missions using modern technology. Despite having advanced robotic rovers and landers, NASA has struggled to recreate the same experience on subsequent lunar missions. Even in 2019, 50 years after Neil Armstrong's historic steps, NASA's unmanned exploration craft captured images that look quite different from the classic Apollo footage. Videos showed these robots encountering difficulties navigating the lunar surface, often slipping and sinking into dusty inclines despite the low gravity. This was a stark contrast to the seemingly effortless gliding of the nimble astronauts during the original moonwalks in 1969. Skeptics found it more plausible that the smooth movements seen in the Apollo footage were achieved on a staged movie set rather than on the unpredictable lunar terrain. Ever noticed how those Apollo astronauts moved across the lunar surface? Some researchers suggest their strides appeared a bit too perfect, almost as if they were following precise choreography rather than walking naturally. It's as if they were directed by a Hollywood pro, ensuring every step and movement was picture perfect for the historic flag-planting scene broadcast live to the world. While some argue it was just a precaution to avoid any mishaps during such a high-stakes production, skeptics see it as evidence of a staged event. These moon landing skeptics scrutinize every detail, refusing to overlook any inconsistencies.
Immediately everyone thought, well, they're now able to really send their military machines around the world up above. Who is not going to be in danger?
To them, it's like finding dead pixels on a movie screen glitch. Each flaw raises questions about the authenticity of the entire narrative. To skeptics, it's becoming increasingly clear year by year that we were presented with one of the boldest illusions of the 20th century, a massive spectacle designed to divert global attention from the Cold War tensions with the Soviets. The lunar samples, missing cosmic rays, bizarre boot prints, mysterious lunar rover physics, all tiny smoking guns pointing a damning finger at potentially the greatest cover-up in human history. All right, let's rewind the clocks to the 1960s. The Cold War between the US and the Soviet Union was heating up bigger than a million-degree sun. The two nuclear superpowers were locked in a high-stakes game of anything you can do, we can do better one-upmanship. Battling for global dominance, the Americans and Russians were flexing their technological might through one skyrocketing arena, the space race. Whoever could slap their flag down on the moon first would emerge as the undisputed superpower champion of the 20th century. NASA and their Soviet rivals were literally shooting for the stars, scattering the cosmos with cutting-edge rockets and satellites that doubled as hulking billboards, advertising each nation's ideological visions for the future. The public relations bonanza opportunities were simply too massive for either side to pass up. The stage was set for a presidential administration obsessed with restoring American prestige on the world stage, no matter how many billions of dollars it took to get there. President John F. Kennedy issued his famous 1962 rallying cry saying, "We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other things, not because they are easy, but because they are hard."
We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other things, not because they are easy, but because they are hard.
Truth be told, the red fear of being one-upped by those godless commies from Moscow was very real and noticeable across the United States. The Soviets were already spiking the football after becoming the first to successfully launch a satellite named Sputnik and the first to slip a human into orbit around the Earth, Yuri Gagarin, taking the iconic first steps on lunar soil before the Russians were more than just an ego-boosting photo op. It was a chance for the self-proclaimed leaders of the free world to seize total galactic public relations ownership. JFK and his administration knew plastering an American flag and footprints all over the moon's surface would demoralize the Kremlin in an unprecedented way. This brings us to a thorny question that conspiracy theorists have been grappling with for decades. Did NASA and the US government get so obsessed with beating the Russians to the moon that they'd actually be willing to fake the whole damn thing? In the eyes of the scam believers, the answer is a loud and proud abso-freaking-lutely. They claim the huge political pressure for America to upstage the Soviet Union was simply too overpowering to risk any potential failure in front of the entire world. All it may have taken is one panicked closed-door meeting where some strange wonk scientist informed President Nixon that we weren't technologically ready in 1969 to pull off a legitimate crewed moonshot as scheduled. They'll be like, "Mr. President, I have some terrible news. The lunar module will never be able to execute a safe landing with our current engine thrust capabilities. And those micrometeoroid risks could pierce the lunar lander like a sieve. We're just not prepared to put American lives in that much peril, sir." And just like that, the White House's mad scramble was on to avoid a public relations catastrophe for the ages. An intergalactic walk of shame unbefitting the self-proclaimed global leaders of democracy and human progress. According to the conspiracy crowd, Nixon's haunted advisors may have been left with only one choice: feed the public the mere illusion of success instead of admitting defeat, even if it required an earth-shatteringly complex web of lies and stage tricks unlike anything ever attempted. In an era where cinema technology was reaching new heights, the temptation to create a realistic simulation of the moon landing in a controlled studio environment may have been too strong to resist. Why risk the lives of astronauts or face technical mishaps on live television when you could create a convincing replica under the guidance of directors like Stanley Kubrick? That's the scenario that conspiracy theorists eagerly propose. It's easy to imagine that no expense would be spared to protect America's pride and global reputation as a leader in technology. With billions already invested in the space program, funding for such a Hollywood-style hoax wouldn't be an issue. For those entrenched in conspiracy theories, it's seen as a small price to pay to avoid being overshadowed by Soviet achievements. Within these circles, the narrative paints a picture of Nixon and his administration facing a monumental decision. Imagine the pressure Nixon must have felt as he grappled with the possibility of disappointing a nation eagerly awaiting a moment of triumph. Should he admit defeat in the space race, acknowledging technological inferiority to the Soviets despite the massive investment already made? Or should he take a gamble and orchestrate what would undoubtedly be the most daring and expensive deception in history? According to conspiracy theorists, it's clear which path Nixon's advisors chose. Why risk a disastrous failure on live TV when the government already had access to top-notch special effects experts and set designers? With the Cold War rivalry at its peak and American prestige on the line, Nixon likely felt compelled to authorize what they saw as the ultimate hoax to win the public relations battle against the Soviets. To conspiracy enthusiasts, the evidence points to a deliberate deception orchestrated to maintain domestic support and outshine the Russians. They believe that even today, the anomalies and suspicious details surrounding the moon landing all trace back to the insecurities and political motivations of the Nixon administration during the height of the Cold War. The skeptics and hoax advocates see the lunar deception theory as fitting snugly within the historical context of the intense rivalry between the United States and the Soviet Union during the space race era. Whether it was fueled by space race paranoia or simply American ingenuity in creating practical effects, these skeptics believe that the moon landing aligns too neatly with the high-stakes tensions between the superpowers at the time. Conspiracy theories go viral like wildfire thanks to megastars and influencers. One man punched moon landing doubts into the mainstream harder than Apollo rockets. His name, Joe Rogan. Let's find out how he ignited this intergalactic inferno of suspicion. Stay tuned. You know how some ideas just seem to catch fire and spread like wildfire? That's exactly what happened with all the crazy theories claiming the moon landings were completely faked. What started as some idle ramblings and mysterious books gradually transformed into a full-blown cultural phenomenon. It all kicked off back in the 70s when a few kooky writers decided to take a sledgehammer to NASA's crowning achievement. Let's meet some of the original instigators who got this whole conspiracy spiral spinning. First up was Bill Kaysing, a former Navy officer turned writer with a huge beef against his old employers at the rocket company, Rocketdyne. In 1976, Kaysing unloaded a jumbo can of worms with his self-published book titled We Never Went to the Moon, America's Billion-Dollar Lie.
Well, since the government, our corrupt government, essentially controls the media, it's no problem for them to produce propaganda film.
The dude went scorched earth, making wild allegations that over 30 sick astronauts had been killed in failed attempts at staging a phony moon landing. He accused NASA of constructing gigantic underground cinemas to film fake spacewalks on a soundstage. Oh, and don't forget the whistleblowers he claims were eliminated to keep this whole thing silent. Kaysing's book didn't exactly burn up any bestseller lists, but its mere existence rattled the birdbath enough for diehard conspiracy nuts to start taking notice of potential cover-ups surrounding the Apollo missions. Then in 1977, an author and amateur scientist entered the arena with even more explosive claims about NASA's integrity. Ralph Rene titled his manifesto, NASA Mooned America, and it quickly developed a cult following. Rene flat out alleged that every single image and video frame from the moon landings were baked soundstage fakes, just utterly manufactured from scratch inside a TV studio by the greatest Hollywood magic acts of the era like Stanley Kubrick. According to the book, the astronauts themselves were merely TV stars, following painstakingly rehearsed scripts and choreography. Every crater, shadow, and blowing dust particle on the lunar sets was scrutinized as bogus by Rene. But the biggest splash came when Rene accused NASA of secretly whacking over a dozen astronaut staff and whistleblowers through the years to bury their bone-chilling revelations. This dude straight up labeled them cold-blooded murderers covering their tracks. Wild accusations to be sure, but just suggestive enough to leave some permanent stains on NASA's pristine image. At least among those already convinced the moon landings were a shady business. These early works were confined to dirty basement printing presses, comic book shops, and roach motel bookshelves for years. That all changed once conspiracy theories hit the internet and visual media like a supernova. In 2001, these developing ideas about NASA's massive lies hit mainstream popularity when Fox aired their smash hit documentary named Conspiracy Theory. Did we land on the moon? Hosted by X-Files star Mitch Pileggi, it racked up over 15 million viewers who were spoon-fed a whole new dimension of doubt. For the first time, millions of average Americans were exposed to all the nagging anomalies within NASA's official narrative. Waving flags, missing stars, suspicious shadows. It was one endless highlight reel of potential fraud. Internet forums and chat rooms immediately erupted into a frenzied speculation. An entire galaxy of homespun researchers and backyard detectives were suddenly born, poring over every Getty photograph and video snippet with the intensity of an electron microscope. The genie of suspicion was officially out of the bottle, snowballing like an unstoppable avalanche with no chance of stopping its descent down the rabbit hole. That brings us to this generation's most prominent moon landing conspiracy messenger, Joe Rogan. Few personalities have shouted these unsettling theories from the rooftops louder and more persistently than the wisecracking podcast king. Rogan uses his signature confrontational approach.
And I've looked at a lot of very compelling documentaries that explain why they think it was hoaxed. And they'll show you some footage, and you can look at some of the footage and it looks fake. There's some footage that, to me, looks really doctored.
To challenge the legitimacy of NASA's Apollo program more aggressively with each passing year. He has essentially amplified the arguments of early skeptics, giving them a substantial boost. From questioning academic experts to dismantling NASA's defenses with countless hypothetical scenarios and impassioned rants, Joe is relentless in his pursuit of the truth. The no-nonsense comedian repeatedly emphasizes his skepticism to his devoted audience, ensuring that the issue remains at the forefront of discussions week after week. When a former NASA data analyst dared to argue in favor of the moon landings being legit on his show, Rogan practically roasted the poor guy over an open flame. Word for word, "You gotta be kidding me, man. There's too much evidence of it being fake, bro. The damn flag was flapping around on the airless moon. The lander engine didn't even make a crater when it touched down. Don't you watch any of the breakdown videos going over all the inconsistencies and flaws in their footage?" Rogan is utterly convinced the whole operation was an insanely complex magic trick of unparalleled deception. His vivid rants transport listeners right into the thick of NASA's supposed war room, where every facet of a moon landing hoax was meticulously planned. From the perspective of JRA University, the space agency colluded with government officials to enlist Hollywood elites in an unprecedented television production. Their secret objective? To proudly plant the American flag on the moon's surface, asserting dominance over the Soviet Union during the intense space race of the Cold War era. For Rogan's devoted followers, this narrative is captivating, delivered straight from the host's mouth regularly. Each week brings fresh layers of doubt, satisfying their insatiable hunger for mind-bending revelations. Thanks to influential figures like Joe Rogan, the moon landing conspiracy has transcended fringe theory status to become a widespread cultural phenomenon. It's akin to how Family Guy has made skepticism mainstream, a phenomenon we might dub the Family Guy-fication of suspicion. Though this skepticism of NASA's moon landing was once scoffed at as total lunacy by the vast majority, it is now considered at least plausible by a good number of curious minds. We may never convincingly prove if those first footprints on the lunar surface were real or just a billion-dollar motion picture magic trick of epic proportions. But the conspiracy theories surrounding the moon landings seem to only gain more traction in true believers with each passing decade. Share your thoughts in the comments section. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more interesting videos.